Hello, everyone. Welcome to the stream. Today we are reacting. We're taking a look at a video by Timothy Kane here. Timothy has someone who's been a developer in the industry for a very long time. I believe he's retired now and just does YouTube. And I've been keeping an eye on some of his videos. I think he's had some really interesting stuff. And today I just want to talk about this one because it honestly it touched a nerve a little bit. And so I just wanted to chat a little bit about it. As always, guys, with all of these videos, please understand that the point here is not to villainize anybody. It's not to be, certainly not to be mean to anyone or anything else. We can disagree and still be friends. We can disagree, rather heatedly and still be friends. I certainly feel this way with the people that I'm closest to. I think that's the best way. Honestly, you need feedback, and if you don't get feedback like that, even if it might be considered quote unquote negative by some, negative, then you're never going to improve. You're never going to learn or whatever. And so I just want to talk about some of this stuff. And I'm sure Timothy has some very good reasons for feeling the way he feels. And we can just chat about it because I think it's useful. And, the goal here is a constructive debate about some of this stuff and also to inform. I think that as a longtime game player, I think that I can, if developers are interested in learning what players think, how they're going through stuff, I honestly think if they're willing to listen, they could learn a lot about how players think about these things. And on the flip side, I also think that players can learn a lot about how developers think. And I have a handful of friends who will either are developers themselves or they're in the space doing something in the gaming space, and and that could be a lot of things. It could be marketing. It could be they work behind the scenes. They could be a programmer. They could be a game developer. And game developer could mean a lot of things. I mean, you could be doing artwork, right? Or you could be doing coding, or you could be doing level design and what have you. And so again, my whole point with all this is to have a constructive conversation. I can be like, you know what, I think you're wrong. And you could be like, Nightharrow, you're wrong about this. And maybe we don't get anywhere today and we just think the other person is wrong about something. That's okay. We can still be friends. The internet is the only place that I know of where it just seems like it's not okay to disagree with somebody and it just be like, okay, I disagree with my friends. I disagree with my wife. I disagree with a lot of people with a lot of different things. And you know what? I'm wrong about probably half those things and they're probably wrong about the other half. Right. So it's okay to, to disagree and to have discourse and to say, hey, I even like fervently, like I absolutely believe this is wrong, as long as it doesn't go to this person is bad because they are wrong. Okay. We don't need to make that jump. We can just be like, hey, I just strongly disagree here. And I think you're off base. All right. Disclaimers out of the way. I can already see I'm losing viewers because I'm giving such a long disclaimer. Let's just go ahead and take a look at this video. So this is entitled, Do Gamers Know What They Like? And yeah, let's just jump into it. We'll pop this up here. As always, if you have questions, you have
Hi
comments,
everyone, it's me.
drop in the comments here. Hopefully everybody should be able to see them. We can have a discussion about it as we go through. This is only like a 15-minute long video. Sorry, I'm still sweating a bit. Came back from the gym not too long ago. Are we in? There we go. Full screen. There we go.
Me, Tim. Today I want to talk about the question, do game players even know what they like? I almost called this, game players don't know what they like.
So do gamers know what they like? Yes. Cool. Close video. Yeah, I think we know what we like. We seem to talk about it quite a bit. We seem to have quite vocal opinions. So I think we know.
But I figured it would lead to a better comment section if I posed it as a question.
Okay, so his actual opinion, his actual thoughts are gamers don't know. We don't know what we like. That's a really interesting take. And from a developer or former developer, this kind of like makes sense to me. Considered, we're grouping all developers together here, obviously painting with a very broad brush, but that does make sense that the developers would feel the gamers don't know what they like. I would say that absolutely we can see this in the way communication happens with game companies and the way games are made currently, that the feeling is like, yeah, gamers don't know what they want. uh, I guess we're like children or something, and this kind of like, it feels like you're being talked down to a little bit. This absolutely like, check, this all makes sense to me.
Let me tell you why I thought of this. I was watching a comedian podcast, not a comedy podcast. I wasn't watching
Hey, Liriel, how's it going?
comedians do stand up. I was talking about comedians talk with each other about being comedians. And one of them made a comment that it's very hard to come up with jokes in a world where audience only know what they find unfunny. And most of them couldn't write a joke if their lives depended on it, especially a joke that you could say in stand-up. And I thought that was interesting because, first of all, I've met a lot of people who think they're funny and they are not funny. But also,
That's kind of a rude thing to say. All right.
stand-up comedy is a perfect example of it doesn't require any equipment or anything. It's basically you and it's pure skill. And there's a lot of people who think they're good at it who are not good at it.
Wow. Okay. I mean, the implication here is he means this for gamers. Hey, Juan Carlos, what's going on? That's interesting. We'll see where he's going with this.
And I thought that was interesting because it was purely skill based. But what the comedian was essentially saying is it's hard to get feedback from an audience because they're laugh when you say something funny and groan or boo when you say something not funny, but they're not actually telling you what it is they liked and didn't disliked about those jokes. You only know whether it was a hit or a miss.
So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here because I did watch most of this briefly, and I don't remember what else he said. It was several days ago. You know, this idea of where he's going with this is like people don't know what they want or something. They can't write jokes, right? You don't need to be able to write a joke to appreciate comedy. You don't need to be able to cook a Michelin star, fine dining meal to be able to know good food. And you can also like not really be able to cook and still appreciate good food. Those are two different things.
This is similar in the game industry, but what really
Similar in the game industry. Okay, so we can't make games. We don't know how to make games. So it's hard to get good feedback. Now, this point, I think that might be more the point he's making. Maybe I don't like the way he's making his point so much as the point he's making. Absolutely, I've heard this from developers, and this is in any business, not in any business. This is in many businesses where it's always hard to get good feedback. That's the whole reason you ever get in surveys? They've kind of given up on them. They do it other ways, but right, they used to do a lot of surveys, or it'd be like, I mean, businesses still do this, where they say, hey, tell us what you like, tell us what you didn't like, and it's really hard to parse through and get like good quality info. I'm going to let it run for a second.
knocked it home for me is someone mentioned a George R.R. Martin quote, which I looked up. He was talking about book readers, and he said, quote, "Now social media is ruled by anti-fans who would rather talk about the stuff they hate than the stuff they love." Unquote. Now, whether or not social media is the cause, I don't know. That's a whole other discussion. I don't even want to have it. But I do see a rise over the decades of my career in how games are discussed, in person and online, which is a prioritization of the bad features over the good. People love to talk about what they hate. And some of them almost never even mention what it is they like. What would they prefer instead?
Well, if you tell someone what you like about something, it's kind of already there, right? Like it's already, you're telling them you don't like it. So ideally they'll change it to something you do like.
And I get it with the rise of monetized channels. I totally understand that rage bait gets more clicks.
So this is a very common thing that I hear all too often. There's a handful of things I hear all the time that I just don't think are objectively, I don't think they're as true as everyone makes it out to be. Rage bait videos and stuff like that. My experience is that when I've never tried to do a rage bait video, but even when I do a video where I'm genuinely upset about something or I genuinely don't like something, I almost always lose subscribers on those videos. And if you say something bad about anything, you'll lose subscribers. Now, I know there are channels that this is all they do. They do the rage bait. There's someone on a tabletop channel that I know that every single one of their videos is always like that. Every one of their thumbnails is clickbait, and it's just talking like it'll always be something ridiculous about how bad everything is. Okay, don't like the channel. I want to like the channel. I want to like the person. I just can't handle that kind of stuff. And they do okay. I think that you really have to go full on if you're going to do a channel like that to be successful in general. Or you can maybe do some things where like you hate the same things that your audience hates, I guess, or something. But in general, I don't find this to overall be true. And more often, I see a lot of videos where someone genuinely is upset about something and they might be totally off base. I saw this recently with Helldivers, where someone was talking about how, hey, I'm just over it with this game, and they gave all the reasons why it was a bad game or whatever, and they were over it. And it was like, dude, this is one of the best games. The developers are some of the best developers out there, and they're doing many more things right than they're doing things wrong. I think you're totally off base. That person, a lot of people were like, "Oh, this is rage bait or whatever," and it's like, no, I think this gamer, this YouTuber genuinely feels that way. It's not about rage bait. The rage bait stuff comes in when you have social media platforms, because as a creator, right? You guys need to like me. You need to like me. You're here because maybe I have something interesting to say, maybe I have something informative to say or whatever. But all that hopefully comes in together where you're like, well, I like this person. And you might feel like I'm wrong sometimes, but you respect my opinion or you like what I have to say enough that you want to click on my videos. Now, if you're the platform itself, that becomes a little bit more convoluted, right? Because the platform doesn't have an identity. The platform isn't saying, you know, oh, I feel X way or I feel Y way so that you can disagree with them. No, no, no. There are other people on that platform that you need to go on there and tell them how wrong they are, right? Or people that you want to go there and trigger for engagement or what have you happens. So that's a different thing where the whole platform benefits from people who are maybe angry or worked up about something. And sure, that's fair. But as far as actual creators, and this is something that, again, in developer circles, I hear this more often than I do in the general public, certainly from gamers, that they think that this is a thing. And I don't know exactly why it is, but I generally speaking, do not find this at all to be the case in most situations. Juan Carlos says you may apply this to content creators too. Barely anyone who likes or dislikes will tell you exactly why, and not always it is on your end to fix or improve according to their criticism. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we'll get into that more as well. I have people all the time that tell me that my videos are, they don't like it or they do like it or whatever, and I don't always know why. And I think we'll get there because hopefully we'll keep saying more stuff about this, and I'll make some very salient points, but I want him to let him kind of talk and say what he has to say here.
So if you go on,
to Juan Carlos's point, though, sorry to immediately pause. To Juan Carlos's point, though, here is that absolutely, as a creator, I deal with the exact same thing. It's a little bit different, but it really is, in broad strokes, the exact same thing. And so do many, I would even say most businesses. I have actually found, I've had a chance in that throughout life, I've worked for several people with independently wealthy, hundreds of millions of dollars in assets, and they're very wealthy. And a lot of them started businesses that they had one or two clients. Okay. So think like one of them was commercial farming, and it's literally plant however many millions of acres of X thing or what, I don't know, millions. I don't know. I didn't work for the farming part of it. Okay. So I don't know anything about farming, but they say plant these and it's just a commodity, right? But they're selling to one or two people. And they're investors or that's their client rather. So those are investors that are giving them money and saying, "Hey, plant a bunch of this stuff. It's a commodities thing. We think we'll make money off of it." They really liked having only a couple of customers. And then when they moved into a business where they had tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of customers, they didn't like it. And they had a lot of problems. And they're like, "Oh, this person gave us a bad review because of this thing that wasn't our fault." And I, as someone who had worked with a business that dealt with thousands and thousands of people, go, yeah, that's going to happen. So, that's going to happen with some number of people for sure, if you're dealing with a lot of customers.
and have a channel and you go, I hate this and these people are dumb and blah, you get more clicks just because that's what people respond.
Again, I don't think this is true. This has never been true in my experience, and this honestly feels a little bit insulting, and I'm a little bit surprised to hear this from Timothy.
On to
Or Tim, I think it goes
But
by Tim.
it doesn't really explain forums or comment sections where the people who are leaving the comments, they have no stake in how many people read their comment. But still, you find that complaints about features are on the rise. And
So his point there, and I'm sorry, guys, maybe we can go back a little bit and let some of this run a little bit more. He's basically complaining that people will make negative comments in places where they have no stake in how many people see those negative comments. Again, as Juan Carlos points out, this happens on YouTube videos. This happens everywhere. So a quote unquote good company, right? We've talked about this as far as marketing approach a lot of times. A good company will want your feedback. They want to hear what you have to say, and they will bend over backwards to try to find out what that is. Excuse me. And Ashes of Creation, as an example, Ashes of Creation in their development, like it or hate it, but they will accept feedback in their Discord. They will accept feedback on the forums, which is where they ask for it. That's an easy place to get it all in one place. But they will look for it on comments on their YouTube videos. They will look for it on Twitter. They will look for it in they added so that people wouldn't just have to write in. Honestly, I feel like for people like me who I'm dyslexic, I'm never going to write out a long feedback thing. They even had like where you could jump into the Discord and talk to some of the community managers and give them feedback, and then they would compile that and then pass it up the chain. They're looking for feedback from like 5 or 6 different places. Okay, they're just happy to get your feedback. Now, other companies we'll call them quote unquote bad companies that are trying to manipulate and control the narrative. They only want it on their forums. And yes, every company wants it in their forums because that's an easy place for them to they can do all kinds of stuff with that data, and they control it, and it's very easy for them to do. But quote unquote bad companies will try to do that because if you complain on their forums, who's going to see that? Literally only other people that play that game and who are also on the forums. So if you have something bad to say, this happens all the time, right? Destiny recently, someone mentioned this is just a random game, right? That, I'm picking one out of a hat where someone was telling me like, oh yeah, I thought I was picking up Destiny, but I heard like a lot of negativity around it or whatever. And this person didn't know what the negativity was. They didn't know it was about content or monetization or whatever. They just heard some negativity. So they were like, I'm not really interested in picking this up. And that will absolutely happen. And a company doesn't want that, especially if they're a company that is their marketing is to try to control the narrative, not to make a great game. That's just something that's going to happen. All right.
constructive feedback saying, I wish they had done this instead, or I like this in my games, is on the decline. At least, at the very minimum, the ratio has been increasing from bad to good. The weird thing about this is, I see people complaining about features that they can 100% absolutely ignore. Yes, the game has that feature. Yes, the game is 100% playable without the feature. But they complain that the feature exists. Like, oh, it's there, it's looking at me. This comes up a lot about microtransactions. Their game.
Wait, time out. Yeah, people don't like microtransactions and will complain about it, period. Yeah, absolutely. That it's perplexing to me that this is a surprise, of course. And then he doesn't understand why. Of course people would feel like this. Microtransactions often ruin games. It incentivizes the company to promote more microtransactions, not to make a great game. If you're making money off of the microtransactions, how the features in the game are no longer what's making you money. Therefore, you are incentivized to do more microtransactions. And also, just the industry as a whole has been so predatory in their microtransactions in the way that they've treated companies or treated customers that across the board, it just has a negative connotation. That's not customers' faults. That's wild. Yeah, no one likes microtransactions. Yeah, that's most people don't. That makes sense. It is only recently, and this is what it takes. It takes companies like GGG. It takes companies like Arrowhead that are. There are companies that have free to play games or really great monetization and still have microtransactions, and I'm personally okay with it. But I've seen it done so bad for so long that if a game is free to play for the longest time, I'm just not even interested because it's going to be a monetization nightmare. And there's countless games you can point to. Now, are there a few games where that might not be the case? Yes, turns out. But those are the minority, and it's not consumers' fault. I mean, clearly we have evidence that like microtransactions are generally bad for games. We have a lot of evidence for that. So of course we're going to feel like that. So, saying, "Oh, people are complaining about things that they don't necessarily have to engage with." That's just such a weird argument to me. There are tons of things where, oh, well, you can pay for power. By this argument, you could pay for power. You could pay to win in a game, and oh, well, it doesn't affect me. Well, you can pay to. Well, what if it's a PVE game? Then you can pay to win, but it doesn't really affect me if someone else pays to win, right? Does it? Does it actually? It doesn't seem fair, and maybe that affects my fun. But honestly, it doesn't affect me directly. So that's just a wild argument. We'll go back a little bit just so we can hear the whole thought here. But that's just wild.
Game is 100% playable without the feature, but they complain that the feature exists. Like, oh, it's there, it's looking at me.
Again, this took developer time. This is something that the company needs to see monetization of. There's a lot of things they need from a game if they put something like that in there.
This comes up a lot about microtransactions. There are games that have 100% cosmetic only microtransactions. People will still complain they're there, even though those transactions in no way make the game easier to play, or it's not pay to win. It's just cosmetic microtransactions.
There's good reason for this. I mean, I've kind of went through all of it. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but there's good reason that people feel that way.
I've mentioned this before, and people's response were, whoa, some of these people are spending or gambling addicts, and they can't control themselves, and this is predatory.
Yeah, they are, and they're children. Yeah, they are, and they're children. Correct.
And it's horrible. But then I did a fast travel video, and I'll link it below, where I said, well, what about fast travel? There are games. Now, you're right. Some people brought up there are some games that aren't designed well. So if you don't have fast travel, and quest markers are harder to play. But there are a lot of games that you do not need to use fast travel. And they even have some difficulty modes where you can't. But guess what? People still do it anyway. Those games are provably that fast travel was not necessary to play the game or even to enjoy the game, but almost everybody does it anyway. There's no gambling component, and people will then go, well, it's more convenient or something like that, but they will do it even when non-fast travel rewards them by giving them fun encounters or new location discovery. They will still use fast travel, which makes the game a lesser experience for them, but they can't seem to bring themselves not to use it. And then that's when they turn around and say, well, it's the designer's fault. He never should have put that in the first place. Which is, again, a whole other discussion of how much hand-holding do you want? And hand-holding in this case is how much should the designer not let you pick and choose how you want to play the game? Should he force you to play it the way that you want to play it and is the way you'll enjoy it and ignore millions of other players? And I'll get to that because a lot of you give feedback as if you're the only person on the planet, but you assume your views represent everyone else. But I'll get to that. I've said before in many videos, if players would only talk more about what they...
Okay, I wanted to let him make sure he finished his thought here, and just because I didn't want to cut him off here. But the complaint, so the issue is it's not just monetization, it's also with fast travel and then getting, conflicting feedback and players will complain about a thing. This happens, again, in a ton of industries. Anything where you have a lot of customers, you're going to get a lot of varied feedback, and it's really hard to parse through it. And from developers I've talked to, this is a big problem for them as well, where they're like, yeah, it's just really hard to get good, high quality feedback and to understand what people want because they complain about the fast travel, yet they'll use it anyways. And even when we incentivize them not to, they'll still do it. I think that was more or less his point. Again, any business, I mentioned this before. I used to manage restaurants, and you would get all kinds of feedback from a customer. And there were so many situations, and you would have managers who would, at failing restaurants that were not doing well, that basically we can't tell anything, so they just discounted everybody's feedback. every once in a while they pick out a piece of feedback and they'd be like, okay, this is good and I'll listen to this. The thing was that the job is to parse through the feedback and to figure out what the customer is actually telling you. That is the job. It might not be Tim's job or somebody else's job, but it's somebody's job, and that is part of running the business. It is difficult, sure, but it is not at all impossible. And what you have to do is just put yourself in the customer. You have to understand the customer's experience. This is everything about it, right? And you have to know your product. You have to know what you're selling well enough that you can understand and parse through the data that customers are giving you. Also, some of this a little bit, and I've seen this over time, I've talked about it a fair amount. A lot of this is people, you know, uh, developers of Tim's aids, and I say this because again, my dad was a computer programmer for a very long time. Probably has a few years on Tim here, but when these guys got into developing games, there was no internet to speak of, right? And you didn't get the feedback you do now. And we see this with younger developers often, although it's not an age gap. It doesn't have to be an age gap thing, but you have to understand that now the readiness of feedback and when you're going to get it and how you're going to get it has increased greatly. And I see time and time again where there are younger developers who understand that they grew up with their life on the internet and they understand these things, and it doesn't affect them nearly as much as those who didn't. And it's like the world changed and some people didn't change with it. And I see that over and over again where they're like, oh, people are very negative, people are complaining. And it's like, I mean, it's the internet. Some people, internet trolls going to be internet trolls, and what are you going to do about it? And just understanding that some of that is going to happen. I had a comment from somebody on this channel where they said that I sounded like I didn't have the microphone, not even this one, the one I used to record upstairs. I sounded like I was like, well, it was something funny. They like, I'll exaggerate, but it was like, you sound like you're in a 98 Honda Civic with aluminum cans in the back and you're strapped in the trunk. Okay. It was very tingy. It didn't sound very good. I needed a new microphone. I need to soundproof the room I was in a lot better. That was a mean comment, right? It doesn't, well, first off, I'm going to be on the internet. Okay. So I understand that I'm going to get mean comments. They don't hurt my feelings. It's not a big deal. I don't care. If anything, I laugh about them. And I really mean that. Like, I send them to friends. Like, I got this mean comment. It's funny. And I'll send it to them. It's just, that's it. We're not making fun of the person. It's just like, I got a mean comment. This is hilarious. Check it out. You can, if you don't believe me, ask Daedric. So understanding you're going to get mean comments, but also that person was right. And what they told me was, oh, I need a better microphone and I need to soundproof the room. I didn't know which or if I needed to do both, but I knew I needed to do something. And that was actionable feedback. And what game developers, Tim has said this in some of his other video, or at least implied it. And I think honestly, this is Bethesda writ large and other game companies as well, is that if the feedback isn't said in a nice way, they just won't listen to it. They just immediately discount it, and they almost pride themselves on the fact that they discount mean feedback, as opposed to going, "Oh, hey, look at this great we got feedback. Our audio sucks. Oh man, we need to do something about that." And it's again, it's a group of people that maybe aren't used to getting that kind of feedback and are not they didn't expect when they started saying, I'm going to be a game developer, to realize that they're going to get this kind of thing. And then the industry changed and they got thrust into the public spotlight more than I think a lot of people wanted, and without knowing the consequences, which is not necessarily their fault. Some of that is just, it just happened to them, but it is a thing. Robert here says, New World started out with no mounts and minimal fast travel. The community rained hell on the devs until they relented. Granted, there was a lot of running. Okay. Interesting. Lyriel says, I feel like they said something like you sound like you're recording inside a trash can. That's what it was. Yeah, inside of a trash can. Thank you, Lyriel. Purify Pre says, removing DLC from Crown Store literally loses me as a customer. Oh, okay. It's a pointless change, especially at a time when the game is having a rough go. Yeah, I think Purify Priest is talking specifically about ESO Priest. Correct me if I'm wrong. And with the recent changes, what has happened is that used to you could buy the certain DLCs, you could buy them for crowns in the Crown store, but now you have to pay for an ESO Plus subscription, I believe. And we can talk about this. I've actually had a few other people mention this in specifically in regards to ESO and some of the info that I've gotten for some very helpful viewers out there, which thank you all. Also, guys, if you're a developer or someone who works in the industry and you have comments, questions, probably more comments and info to give me to help me understand this stuff, I would greatly appreciate it. I've gotten that from several people. I will never disclose your information. I consider that, and I will do my best to obfuscate any sort of info that I get. I have gotten it from people that work in big companies and what have you. And I just want you to know, feel free to DM me, feel free to drop in the Discord and what have you. Help me, tell me I'm wrong, tell me why I'm wrong. That stuff's incredibly helpful. It has been eye-opening for me in the past, so I really appreciate it. But I have someone who mentioned that, it's probably the case, or it seems to be the case, and maybe there's data on some of this, that there are a lot of people with crowns in reserve. So like right now, I don't know, I don't usually use crowns, except for I'll buy stuff so that I can use it on as a thumbnail, right? Because I get it with my yearly subscription or what have you for ESO. And I've been so unhappy with ESO the past like year that I didn't want to buy I actually went without a sub for a long time, for several months, and the crafting bag kind of makes it where you have to. But there's a lot of people with a bunch of crowns, so if they release content that you can, the crowns are money they already have, and so they need more money. And it could be many reasons why they need more money. It could be that they have financial incentives after the buyout with Microsoft to continue the game to make money, right? They don't want to buy a company and then the key employees leave and the company's sales drop and the thing that they bought isn't worth as much as they paid for it. So a lot of times there's contracts whenever you buy a business where like the CEO or certain key people have to stay for a certain number of years. There could be financial incentives for them, but that's probably why they are doing that. And if you're, yes, they said they will add it in later, but nobody wants to wait to play with their gaming buddies. Yeah, that's fair. That's the sort of thing where like you have to pay for the time. Priest, I don't personally mind that so much, just because all through life, again, I grew up, we didn't have a ton. We weren't incredibly poor, but I would always go to the cheaper movie theater and see movies like 2 months after they came out. I would buy games years after they came out and play them and stuff like that. So my entire life, I've conditioned myself to be a late adopter, and turns out it can work really nice, honestly, if you are. But I totally get that. If your friends just got it, what are you going to not play with them? They just got the newest thing, so now you're kind of out. So even if you don't want to buy it, that's different. All the things I was talking about mostly, generally speaking, were just me. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. And then Lyriel says, or at least, okay, yeah, cool, yeah. So, there's a lot of we'll just hit play. We'll hit play.
Want instead of what they don't want. This would be so much better and so much.
So sorry, I started. I immediately paused it. He's talking about it would be so much easier if people would tell us what they want instead of what they don't want. And remember the title that he was going to go with was like gamers don't know what they like. This is like going, again, I'll use the restaurant analogy. I can use plenty of others, guys, because there's plenty of things this relates to. But this would be like going to a restaurant and not liking the food there, and the chef being like, well, what do you want? What do I want? I mean, it's your restaurant. You got a menu. I mean, maybe I could tell you exactly what I want, sure. But in general, like if you're in a creative field, if you're an artist or something like that, you're not saying, oh, well, what do you want? And I'll make that art. No, you're an artist. You're making something. I don't expect my viewers to tell me what YouTube videos to make. I mean, sometimes they do and they give me feedback and I can figure out stuff. Sure, but like that's not how I expect this relationship to work. I don't expect you guys to tell me exactly what you want. Now, if you're in engineering and I need a part, I might tell you exactly what I want and the specifications that I want it in. Sure, but most businesses or many businesses, it's not like the customer tells you exactly what you want and then you do that. Those are like in custom businesses where you're getting a product made for you, not a product made for the masses. What gamers want is a good game that's fun to play. And if your game is not fun to play, they'll probably tell you why. I get that it's difficult. I get that it's not easy. But again, that's the job. This is like a chef saying like, oh, my job's hard. And you're like, I have to cook this food. And you're like, I mean, dude, it's your job that you're cooking food. It's like me complaining about, I don't know what videos to make. I felt that way for the past like 6 months. I don't know what to make, but I'm not complaining to my audience about it. I'm behind the scenes trying to figure it out.
Clearer and so much cleaner feedback. It, first of all, it gives developers a much better idea of how many people want those certain features. If you just say you don't like fast travel, but you don't say what you want instead, they're not sure how to implement that fast travel-less game. Do you want more encounters? Do you want a paid way of doing fast travel? Do you want a resource-intensive way of doing fast travel? What do you want? Because doing nothing is 100% giving you.
So what they want is a fun experience. That's it. There's many ways of doing that. It is up to you as the game developer to figure out what that fun experience is. If they're telling you, hey, we don't want fast travel, there could be a lot of things. This is the meeting. I've had many meetings like this where we sit down with businesses and say, okay, here's the feedback, and we go through feedback, and usually they've got a bunch, and when you have bad managers, what they say is, oh, they just discount everybody, and they say why you shouldn't listen to this person's feedback, as opposed to sitting down and going, oh, they sounded like I'm recording in a trash can. Well, what the hell does that mean? Let me listen to that back. Oh, yeah, it does kind of on certain speakers. Some speakers it's fine, but on some speakers it doesn't sound very good. That's what they're talking about. Okay, and that's an easy one. All the time I get feedback where I'm just like, wait, what is this? And usually what I do is I engage, and like honestly, much greater than 50% of the time, whenever I engage with someone, even if they said the meanest thing in the world, sometimes someone just shit posts, right? Like a short, this sucks, whatever. You can't really engage with that, right? But if they actually wrote out something, that's a customer. If they wrote out something long too, oh my God, that is a customer who wants to engage with you. They want to talk with you. Now they might be giving that information in a not so healthy way, but if you can engage with them, and then you can, oh my gosh, they'll tell you all kinds of stuff that will be incredibly helpful for you and your business. And having to parse through that when you can't always talk to a customer is the job. Figuring out, okay, they don't like fast travel. Why don't they like fast travel? Well, I don't know. We could probably figure it out. Well, maybe they come from another game where there was no fast travel and they really enjoyed the process of moving from point A to point B. I mean, I can tell you almost definitely, probably because there's something engaging along the way and it feels earned to move from point A. Maybe there's a little bit of risk. All these things like, oh, okay, cool. We can figure out what people like or don't like about this thing without having to just tell us what you like. This is constant. Bethesda has said this a lot of the time. I get that you can want feedback in a certain way, and you can try, to get feedback in a better way, but you can't change human nature, and like trying to is just kind of crazy. And I think you can still run a business while parsing through what people actually like and what they enjoy. And the other thing is that if you understand your business really well, if I understand YouTube and what kind of videos I make and what kind of, and I don't think I do. Okay, I could do a much better job of this, but if I could understand that, then when I get feedback, I can act upon it in a better way. Now, I've worked in other businesses that I understood better than YouTube. I'm still learning here. And I could tell you when someone gives a comment, I could parse through it and figure out what the actual issue is. The other thing that will happen when you're dealing with a lot of customers is that someone might have a bad experience with one thing. Okay, so let's say that you have a product that you deliver to customers, and this is most products now, right? We're ordering something off Amazon or whatever, you direct order it, and it takes 2 extra weeks when they expected it to take a couple of days. When that customer finally gets that product, they've had a bad experience. They expected it almost certainly 2 weeks ago. They're frustrated. They might blame you. It might be your company's fault. It might not. But most likely that customer is already, when they finally get the product, maybe they don't even need the product anymore. Whatever it is, they're not in a good mood. And then they get the product and there's something wrong with it right off the bat. Or maybe there's nothing actually wrong with the product, but they perceive that there's something wrong with the product at first. Now they're already frustrated. They went from frustrated to pissed. Okay. And now and they had a bad day, right? husband was a jerk, so now they're frustrated and pissed, and they're already having a bad day because their significant other was already triggered them. Okay, and then they look at the product and the product's kind of fine, but they have this huge negative bias. Maybe they're pissed off about it. Maybe they go on and they write this really mean, scathing review about everything wrong with the product. I have this is a made up example, but I have literally seen this countless times. And what you have to do when these situations, if you can, this is dealing in a very microscopic layer, but you have to figure out what the problem is. And what the problem is was the product arrived 2 weeks late. That's the real problem. Had the product arrived on time, the perceived issue with the product probably wouldn't be a perceived issue with the product. And then the thing that kind of annoyed them, really, it's not that big a deal. The product still works fine. It's just maybe not exactly what they wanted, but it's still better than all the competitors in the market. They're fine with it. They're not going on there and writing some scathing review. That literally happens. And you have to be able to, if you're dealing with customers, if you're dealing in customer service, which games are now, which is the thing I keep saying is that game developers didn't understand or don't understand that they're now in the customer service industry. Especially if they're dealing with live service games, if you don't understand that, then people are you're not gonna be able to parse through the data. And so you might get a complaint from a customer on a game, and they might list all the things they're pissed off about and they don't like in the game. But really, it might have started with one thing. In restaurants, I've seen this with someone not getting greeted. Someone didn't say hello to them, and it took forever. And then after that, everything is wrong with the meal, with whatever. And it's not that everything they said is necessarily valid or important, but you have to be able to drill down. I get it, it's difficult. It's really hard. And there are ways that you can do this with broad numbers of people. And you see this with community managers and with companies that engage with their players to figure out what is going on, what they really don't like. And yes, you are going to get it's the internet. You're going to get some amount of people. I've had people yell at me and go off at me on the comments. And I engage with just about everybody I can. If they again, shit posts, like short posts that don't really mean anything, that are just angry, I can't really, what am I going to say? You suck. I'll heart that and be like, thanks for the feedback. I'll still say that. I don't care. It doesn't hurt my feelings. They didn't like something about that video or whatever. I've had so many times where someone comes back and apologizes to me. I can't even tell you. And they're like, "Hey, sorry, I was just having a bad day." Yeah, that happens. As a big company and you're dealing with thousands and thousands of people, sure, maybe you don't need to engage with all that. Maybe you can just say, "Hey, some of you guys were disappointed with the what came out. We're sorry about that. We're always trying to improve." That's all you have to say. Acknowledge it, move on, and then address the things you can actionably address. That's all you have to do.
Not fast travel, but that's probably not what you want. You probably want something in exchange for not having the fast travel.
Yeah. So remember his point was about fast travel. They probably do want something in exchange. Yeah. I mean, obviously, yeah. He's working through this. Obviously, he knows this, but
And if you think this should be as simple as putting a checkbox in saying to turn off fast travel, you can see my video on doing difficulty, where there are people out there that think certain options should be decided by the designer, not the player, and therefore should not be provided in the options menu. They basically say, don't make me decide how to play your game. Just be aware that there's no good solution to this, because there are lots of players out there who want lots of options. They love playing around, like, oh good, the game lets me turn off the HUD. Oh good, the game lets me turn off fast travel. They want that. They look for that.
So this is again getting caught up in the minutia of what a one particular customer might want or like or something or have a preference for. Yes, we're all different. We all have different opinions and what have you. The thing that we care about is it fun? You just need to keep coming back to, is it fun? If it's fun, that covers over so many other issues. And that's, if you make fast travel fun, or not, the lack thereof fun, oh, I wish they would have done this, or oh, I wish they would have done that. But that's all we're saying. It's not a big deal. We're not mad, we're not angry, and we're still enjoying the product. And if that's just what you have to do, you just have to make it fun. So many games lose sight of this, and it's wild to me, because that is the question. That's the only question that matters when you're talking about games. Is it fun? Is the thing that, and if it is fun And there's, oh, I wish there were more options here or there or whatever. That doesn't matter. And I think some of what Tim is saying here is that it's hard for developers to figure out what matters and what doesn't matter. And this all comes back to knowing your product and knowing your business. So for me, I make YouTube videos. I make really informative ones typically, right? Informative videos are what I really like. But I think what the core audience, yes, there are folks that just care about the information. But what I have seen clearly, if you look at larger YouTube channels, maybe even the ESO space, they're entertaining. And they pull you in and you're like, oh yeah. And you know what? There's also this idea that after I watch this video, now I'll have gained this knowledge and I'll be better and stronger and better at this game. That's what people want. Now, some of that's a little hard for me because I don't want to tell people that some build is going to make them unkillable, God mode, infinite sustain, right? Because nothing really is, and I feel like I would be lying, right? And trust is the core of what I do. And so I don't want to do that, but I have realized over time that my videos need to be better. They need to be more entertaining, and it's not just about delivering the highest quality info, because if you look, and you'll see other people out there in the competitive space with me, and there are also people that give really good, high informative videos. Most of those don't have the highest views or the highest subtotals. So it really is the entertainment. So that is something that I have learned about my business. And it is not the customer's job, but it's not you guys' job to tell me that. And no one ever has. No one ever has told me, as far as I can remember, that like, hey, your videos just need to be more interesting. I have asked for feedback from friends, and people never want to give you negative feedback whenever they know you or what have you, but some of them have, and a lot of positive feedback as well. I don't know if anybody has ever been like, hey, dude, your videos just need to be cooler. They just need to be more entertaining. Maybe, you click on a Zynode video and he's got like he's got some beats on the front and then he's telling you about how great, like, oh, this is amazing. You're going to be awesome. Be able to kill, slay everything. You're like, yeah, I want to be able to kill and slay everything. And yeah, this music gets me hyped. But you don't blame the consumer for you not knowing your business well enough to do that. I don't blame you guys because I didn't know enough about what I do to make the product that you wanted. It's wild to me that you would blame the consumer for this.
There is no good solution for a developer. The problem is when people just tell you what they don't want, it's hard to get an idea of what the percentage is of people who want an alternative. It's like, okay, I know you don't want fast travel, but what do you want? Do you want more random encounters? Do you want a paid fast travel? Things like that. Or if you're tired of me talking about fast travel, I've done...
Did he just say paid fast travel? What? We're going to let it go.
2 different videos on encumbrance. And there are plenty of people who think that how items should be available and what should happen after you pick them up should be handled differently. Read the comment section. I'm not sure people were reading them. People were leaving comments saying everybody hates encumbrance. And then literally the next comment was, oh, I love when games have encumbrance. I'm not sure people read the comments because there are a lot of comments where people love to say categorically, no one likes this, everyone hates this, right after a comment or before a comment of somebody saying they like it. So please take a look at the comment. In fact, let's talk a little bit about how to comment.
All right, well, we're gonna get to that. Daedric said something here. The thing is, the audience you pick up is already okay with whatever you're producing, so it's hard to get constructive negative feedback without looking way outside your typical audience. Oh, that's a great point. It's a great point, Daedric. The unfortunate truth is that the loudest voices tend to make the biggest impact. Is what Robert says. Yeah, that could be fair. An example of something like this and I'm just trying to empathize and trying to put myself in developers, or in this case maybe Tim's shoes, and to understand and kind of talk about it, because I think that's helpful. Is for me, should I make my videos longer or shorter? Okay, so I can make them longer and I can tell you guys more information. Okay, every video I've ever done, I've cut out information that I could have included. Now, the majority of the audience really wants a shorter video. If a video is so long, understandably, a lot of people just will never click on it. However, my core audience, you guys, really likes in-depth videos where I explain, because a lot of people really like about my content, and I've gotten this positive feedback over the years, is that I explain not only what to do, but I explain why to do it. Now, what do I do? Those are two things that are diametrically opposed. You can either you can make it sure I can try to cram more info into a shorter time frame, but I've actually had experiences, and this actually just happened recently on my other channel, the tabletop channel, where I crammed so much info into so short of a time period that it wasn't useful, and I got that feedback from somebody because it was just like, dude, it's too much. You got to like pause or something. It's just like information flood, and I turned the spigot on full blast. I never like slowed up for them to kind of take a pause or whatever, which comes back to like making videos entertaining as well as informative. But those two things are diametrically opposed. What do I do? You know what? It is a problem, but it's my problem. And it's not my customers' problem to tell me how to do that. I don't, if someone gives me that feedback, I don't, well, how do I do that? And I don't tell them the problem like they're the issue. I say, hey, I appreciate the feedback. I'll try to figure that out. Now, what do I do with that? Well, part of what I've tried to do is that when I make videos, they need to have the most broad appeal, and I want to do it very quickly. So one of the things I do is I split off videos. I have a video going in detail about how to make a raid group composition, explaining the current composition at that time, but it explains more generally how to do it. And then I did a second video that I split off from that one because each one of them is like 30 minutes long. One of them might be only 25, but the other one's like 40, I think. And the other one I split off, and I explained why it's so important. And I showed the math. I did some back of the napkin calculations in a spreadsheet and everything else, and I went into great detail. So one of the ways I do that is by splitting things off. Earlier today, I was working on our 2-bar Nightblade build video for Nani specifically, but it's just for everybody. But I'm doing it now because Nani needs it. And in doing that, I realized, like, talking about taunt and trying to figure out what to say about taunt, that I need to do an entire video just explaining the current state of taunts in ESO. It's overly complicated. It shouldn't be like that, but it is. So I was just like, okay, well, I'll just do that as another video. So that's how I make a video shorter, but still provide all that same information. And then in the video, I'll say, what I'm going to do is say, hey guys, if you want to know everything you want to know about taunts, go check out this other video that almost nobody will watch. But I do that because I'm trying to serve my core audience, and I want to make sure the information is there for them. And so that's one of the ways. Is it difficult? Yes. Is it hard? Yes. Is it, in some ways, is it not the best use of my time all the time to make these super specific videos on these very in-depth things that less than 1,000 people will watch, which is nobody, guys. That's not going to pay the bills, or I might spend weeks on something that only like 1,000 or a couple hundred people watch. It's just not going to go very well for me. I can't make a channel like that. I do it because I think it's good for the business as a whole. And so that's my solution. But regardless of whatever the solution is or whatever the problem is, it's not my customers' issues. It's mine. Robert says, I watch you for information on builds and skills. I may also watch another creator for a non-optimized build, but I come back to yours for the facts. Cool, man. Appreciate that. Also love that you don't paywall the majority of your content. Yeah, absolutely. I try to basically paywall nothing. I do the delayed thing sometimes. Only a tiny bit, and I'll probably do more of that in the future. But again, that's because I come from a background where I was used to waiting for things, and so I feel like that's a valid way of kind of. I do need to try to generate revenue. I am a business. I'm not doing this just for the fun of it. So there is some issues with that, absolutely. But yeah, the other thing is, well, never mind. We'll just get back to the video here.
Like I said, I would way prefer on this channel and for any forum where you're talking to game developers, say what it is you liked, especially why you like doing that feature. I have an entire video on how to give good feedback. It's called Being Constructive. It's way easier to respond to constructive feedback than non-constructive feedback. So what I don't understand is if you really want to get what you want, say what it is you want. Now, some people just be like, no, I've got to say what I dislike. It's not fair. Saying what you dislike is just as useful. It is if it's specific, which many of you aren't. There is a video I have called Feedback.
I'm sorry. A little bit of this is a little cringe just because, again, it is like, this is like telling people not to feel the way they feel and telling the customers not to think or feel the way they do. I think it's well intentioned, but that's how it comes off. And so it's like a little bit like, dude, come on. Yeah, someone else. Who is this guy? This is a YouTuber. He's got like 170,000. I actually like caught him pretty early. He's blown up over the past, I guess, couple of years. I don't remember when, but he's got over almost 200,000 subs. He was a developer. He actually worked on like Fallout. He did a lot on Fallout 1 and 2, and then he went spun off, made his own game studio that I don't think worked out, and he's retired now. But he worked for Bethesda for a long time. He also Fallout is based on GURPS, which is the tabletop game I play, which is part of the reason maybe that I know about this guy and what he's doing.
Needs context, so you need to watch that. But let me give you the high level example there, which is if you just go, enemies are dumb, stop giving us dumb enemies. Okay, you just give negative feedback, but you give absolutely no context. So it's not like they can go in and go, hey, programmer, can you click the checkbox for smart enemies?
Yeah, again, this is just like knowing your business and understanding what people are telling you when they give you. Maybe he's just trying to ask for people to give better feedback and what have you. That I mean, I don't think this is going to do anything to move that needle. This is someone who talks about making games all the time. I think the people that are already in this, but I don't know. Maybe he's on a mission to civilize. I can get behind that. I hope that works. Yeah, Robert. It's funny. I got a comment today on the tabletop channel that was like, if you haven't tried something like the Fallout with the GURP system, it's amazing. And I had to respond like, yeah, absolutely. That's where it came from. Is from like a GURPS game.
It may be that what you meant was these enemies never take cover. There's cover all over the place that I use, but they never take it. Oh, you want enemies to take cover more frequently. Okay.
This is another thing that this is like, I'll use the, I don't know, you guys tell me if you're tired of the restaurant analogy, but this is like a telling the chef being like, well, you should tell me if you want a little bit more of this particular spice in the food. And it's like, nah, dude, I'm not trying to cook. That's why I paid you. You're supposed to make the thing that's good. And if, I'm not supposed to tell you, if I have to tell you how to do it, then like, do I just go make it myself? That's literally how certain recent game studios have happened. That's how Ashes of Creation happened. And I could list a handful of others, is because there's a group of people that are like, yeah, there's not a game doing this, and I'm tired of developers not listening. I'm just going to go make it. I mean, that's how Path of Exile came about, right? It's exactly how it came about. Daedric says, in this day and age, you'll get 20 examples of very specific things to fix from people yelling. Look at PoE2's feedback cycle. Yeah, and the other thing is that, like, they'll complain about, like, oh, well, one person says this, and someone will say the diametrically opposed thing. Your video should be shorter. Your video should be longer, or more detailed. I don't like you're doing less details or whatever in your videos. That's the job. You've got to figure it out. And if you know your business, if you know the game you're making, also a lot of this stuff, this is insane to me that this doesn't happen. But any gaming company, guys, there should be somebody, ideally several people with differing tastes, like by default, but there should be somebody at your company who knows your game better than everybody else. And that person needs to be listened to. Okay. It could be anybody. But you got to listen to them. Now, most businesses, this needs to be someone very high up, because otherwise they just won't get listened to. And if anytime they suggest something that someone doesn't want to do, they'll just be discounted. So it probably needs to be someone fairly high up. But there should be somebody in a game company that has played the game and knows it. You don't have to know it as well as the sweatiest player with the most number of hours, but you need to know it quite well. And if you do, I know I certainly feel this way as someone who games more than is healthy. Okay. And whenever I talk to maybe some of my friends out there who also game more than is probably healthy, right? Who just play a lot of a game, what's wrong. You know what can be fixed, and you know it can be improved because you know the game, you know the product. And that should, like, there's no substitution for that. If you know the game, you know the product, and we can see this. You can look at games like Larian, like the Baldur's Gate, right? The thing about Baldur's Gate is that the combat in Baldur's Gate uses D&D. Larian's own system for combat in their previous games, like Divinity, Original Sin, and 1 and 2, it's better. It's objectively better. obviously in one person's opinion, but it is objectively better than what it is in Baldur's Gate 3. Now the story and everything else is great, but Larian is going back to making their own games and their own systems because they want the flexibility to do that. And because I think that they know that, yeah, we can make something better and not just trying to fit it into this pre existing system where it doesn't quite work. We can make something that's more cohesive and better. And so their next game is going to be even better than Baldur's Gate 3, okay? And that is a company that knows their business, knows their game, and can improve upon it. And a counterexample to this potentially is Civilization, the Civilization series. Now, I have only dabbled before Civilization 6. That's when I really dug in. And I say dabbled, I played more than most people probably did of some of the earlier Civ games, but it was still dabbling by Civ standards. Civilization 6, I have a laundry list, and I've talked about it, of things that I would like to see from that game. Why? Because I have over 4,000 hours in the game. Okay, I have a ton of hours in Civilization 6. I can tell you all kinds of stuff, all kinds of issues. All of their marketing and all of their press and all of their hype have never addressed even, I don't even think like one of the issues. No, I shouldn't say that. Maybe one or two of the issues. One of the things is that they have divided the game up differently so that it's more easy to balance civilizations and various leaders. Great. That was a major thing that was a real big problem, especially for the PvP community. I don't think they've addressed any of the other things, at least not publicly. So the question is, do they know? And are they going to fix it? And I don't think that they know. I don't think they've acknowledged, even if they know it, I don't think they've acknowledged it's as big of a problem. And so I don't think that most of those things are going to get fixed. Now, I hope I'm wrong. And I think the game could be fun despite that. Okay, this is the part where it's like, well, the game, ultimately, the only thing that matters is it fun? And if it's fun despite still having all of the same flaws, you know what? I'm probably going to play it as long as it's somewhat of an improvement. But just like with Civ 6, Civ 6 is such a frustrating game to play because it's almost so good, except for the AI is like stuck in like 1999 where it just can't comprehend certain things. Like I'll have a Civ, Pedro's doing well. He's beating me on science and culture, and then he decides to declare war on me late game, and I'm like, well, dude, I'm just going to crush you. I'm trying not to fight a war, but sure, if you want to go there, I'll send GDRs, giant death robots, that's what they're called in the game, to come clear you out, and then you've lost the game, right? Like that now he's no, and it's like, I just want the computer to kind of play intelligently, and you can't get that. And there's a host of other features that I don't think. And the question is like, do they know their game? Well, one of their core playtesters loves combat, apparently. He's all about combat. And you know what? Knowing that and playing Civ 6, I'm like, yeah, that explains a lot. Yeah, combat is way too much a part of this game, at least for my enjoyment, and there's no way to tone that down or turn it off, and that would certainly be a huge improvement to the game. And it just feels like maybe nobody over there knows the game as well as they should. And when I say that, a lot of people will be like, well, they're the developers of the game. They know it better than they should. Again, I mentioned my dad's a computer programmer. He's been a computer programmer. The first, I think, major job he had, I think, was with, I want to say IBM, but it might have been somebody else. And the computer took up an entire floor of the office building they were in. And this is in a major city. And whenever they would turn on the computer, the lights in that city block would dim. Now, I thought this was a story until I confirmed by other programmers that no, this was a thing. I thought it was a tall tale, okay? So he's been working on computers forever, and he's been a programmer for forever. Knows a ton about programming, right? And it's a big space, obviously, those of you who are programmers. So my dad is really bad at using what is referred to as GUIs, or graphical user interfaces. And when I say that, basically everything you use on a computer is a graphical user interface, right? When you click on a button, right? When I go on the screen and I go to click play, that's a graphical user interface. You're not having to type a command like slash, name of the YouTube video, play, whatever. You just click a button, okay? So you can be a programmer and not even understand how a graphical user interface works, right? Because that's not usually how you interact with the product. And the same could be for game developers because that's not necessarily how they interact with the product all the time. It's not the same as the end user experience. And so it's critically important that you have somebody who understands where the customer is coming from in any business. Robert says, following your analogy, the chef needs to cook what they think is great and draw on the customers that like their cooking. Absolutely, 100%. And then Lyriel says, is Divinity the one where you can befriend the cat and then Necromancer squirrel that follows the great acorn? Yes, Lyriel, that is indeed Divinity. In Divinity, you could get these spell books, and the game didn't hold your hand. It didn't tell you, but you could combine. Like you could combine rain and like blood drain or blood something, and you could make blood rain. Which then you could do something else with. That was an example of like, oh, that's cool. And you would have limited resources, right? So you're like, well, should I try to combine these and make a spell that I don't even know what the effects are, or should I do something else? Anyways, this is a great system.
That's constructive. I can work on that. So think of it as a wish list too. Like imagine somebody came up to you and said, hey, what do you think Tim Kaine would like for his birthday? If you said he would love a dark chocolate bar, at least 65% cacao, versus he hates white chocolate, what do you think is more likely to get me something I want? The first one, I'm going to get a dark chocolate bar.
The other part of this is that gamers have been telling many companies, right, and then we're grouping them all together for years what we want, and we don't get listened to, and they tell us why they can't do it or why it's not a good idea or whatever, and they're just wrong. And when you don't get listened to, this happens too with companies. It builds up. Have ESO, it's crazy, right? And it builds up, and there's frustration, there's pin-up frustration until you're not going to get good feedback. If you're a developer in ESO, you're not going to get good feedback most of the time on PvP. Why? Because you've already gotten it and you ignored it and you haven't done anything with it. You've told, oh, we're working on it for years and years and years. And it's like, yeah, we don't trust you. The trust has totally been broken. And so now people are just raging in your comment section wherever they can. Yeah, I'll go in the forums and yell. I'll go in the live streams and yell. And you know what they do is they just mute those people. They just try to like silence them and contain, that frustration and that anger. Same with the in-game community doing, trials and what have you. It's the exact same thing. And so while Tim's point here might be valid, you have to understand, even if you're not ZOS or Bethesda or whatever, other game companies do that. And so you're going to have to deal with customers who come into your product feeling that same way. And that happens all the time. It happens with Arrowhead, where again, you have someone who's like mad. They made a whole YouTube video about how disappointed they are. There's not enough content in the game. The developers haven't done enough. And it's like, dude, the game's $40 and they've delivered so much content. What are you even talking about? But they feel like, for whatever reasons, they're jaded from other games. And you know what? As a business, as a company, excuse me, you just have to realize, like, yeah, that's going to happen. You wish it wouldn't. You wish there was something different, but it's going to happen. People come into my videos that are off meta, right? They only parse 115K at the top end instead of 125 or something. And it's like, yeah, this build video is for someone who wants a Bobo Warden that has this theme, right? It's not just Bobo. It needs to have bow skills on it. So I can't pick the best skill. I need to pick the best bow skill or a skill that feels appropriate for that particular class. And I make that build and it's like, cool. And then some people will be like, oh, this is a garbage build. You could get more damage. And you're like, cool. Well, thanks for telling me you didn't watch the video. But also second, like, yeah, I realize, I know, and it's just going to happen. I'm not mad at the world or mad at people for, not doing that. It's just, some of this is like human nature that you can be mad at it, I guess, but if you instead try to understand human nature and then work within that and understand people, then I think it'll be more beneficial for you, for your company and what have you. As an example, actually, we'll hit play for a second here, and then I'll come back to that.
That's at least 65% cacao, which immediately puts it in a range of chocolate that I absolutely adore. But the person who said he hates white chocolate, I may get a Snickers bar. Well, I don't want anyone back on Snickers. Snickers are okay. But you can see that just saying I hate white chocolate, maybe they're getting me a boat. I don't want a boat, but they're like, well, it's not white chocolate. This is why it's so hard for developers to deal with your negative feedback. You're not telling them what you want. Just telling a developer what you don't want. Guess what? The space of
So much of this too just feels, and I get this from, I mean, we've seen it from ZeniMax Online, right? We've seen it from so many, so much of it feels like, hey, we don't want your negativity. Just give us positive feedback. And with Tim's other comments in his videos, he's mentioned like, oh, people know if you're one of the people that gives negative feedback, they know, and it, you know, basically like implied that they don't listen to you or they make fun of you in the background or something. I absolutely believe that that happens, and it's just to me it's the wrong attitude to have. And part of it is like you just got to have doing what I do, and I might be an extreme example of this. I had someone who was like, hey, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings about this or something. And I mentioned it to my wife, and she was like, oh, do they not know that they literally can't hurt your feelings on that? And I was like, oh, I mean, yeah, I tried to tell them or whatever, but literally you have to know if you're going to be a public figure, if you're someone who is going to be engaging with a lot of customers, that it's going to happen. And the thing is that there are developers who know this and they don't want it. And I can't tell you their Twitter handles. I can't tell you who they are on Facebook. I can't tell you how they feel about anything. Why? Because they keep those things private. And that's the way it should. And I certainly don't go looking for them or anything else, but they don't have a public. A lot of them try to have it both ways, where they have this public facing Twitter or whatever, and then they say, oh, the views are my own. Well, that's like having a sign on the back of your truck that's like, I'm not responsible for debris falling off the back of my truck. You can have a sign that says that. It doesn't mean that you're not actually responsible legally for the debris falling off the back of your truck. You can say, oh, this is my personal account. My views are my own. But if you're the person in charge of a company or in a high ranking position and you have certain opinions, it's going to matter. And it does matter. And trying to like gaslight people or just tell them, oh, no, this is separate from that. You can't have it both ways.
what you could want is huge, and you're not helping. In fact, you're in many ways you're hurting because you're jamming up the channel of communication with noise, with unactionable feedback. So you may think, well, this may not.
And again, I'm not trying to. So remember, Tim made this video. He's got almost 200,000 subs. All right. He's put himself out of the internet. We can disagree. Doesn't mean I hate him or anything. Okay. Doesn't mean you should hate him. Right. We can disagree strongly, but all of this information, like all of what he's saying here, maybe not all of it, but much of it comes down to, I don't like the way, we developers don't, and he's giving you the developer perspective, but don't like the way feedback is being given and what have you. Again, it's the job, and it's just what's going to happen. Back to the understanding human nature and working within it. If I ask, excuse me guys, if I ask for feedback, if I put up a build in the Discord and our help channels and I'm like, hey guys, anybody have any suggestions for improving this or what have you? I know that or anywhere else, I know that I will get almost no one will say anything. Okay. Now we're nerds. And if nerds like, one thing more than anything else, that's correcting people. So if I instead say, hey guys, I think I figured out the best build for this, check it out, I will get 10 people telling me about how it could be better. Now, the feedback they get might be like, oh, no. On this one fight, in this one trial, this would be bad and you should use something else. Reference Asylum Sanctorum, the exception to all rules. And it's like, okay. And then I might get some feedback that is like, oh, on these specific fights in, half the trials in the game, on one of the fights in that thing, that you could do something better. And here's how, and here's why. That's even more helpful. And then I might get someone who says, oh, this one thing is wrong, and this other skill would just do that better. And you could let somebody else do that other thing you're trying to include on this build. Somebody else in the group will have it. Cool. Those are 3 different kinds of feedback. One of them is like, okay, cool. I probably won't do anything about that. Yes, Asylum Sanctorum is the exception to most, rules and builds and what have you. Just not really useful to tell people that, and it's really specific. Essentially, it might be a really specific case. The second type of feedback is like, man, that's really helpful and that's a good point, but telling people in certain situations when there's no way to explain to them when those certain situations are, except for just knowing, okay, that's not going to be very helpful for them. Okay. And then the third situation is like, oh, I should just improve my build. Now, what I did is I got an engagement hack. And that is that nerds like correcting people. So they will jump in. So instead of trying to fight human nature and be like, you guys all suck because you don't give me feedback on my builds, right? That'd be cringe, right? That'd be pretty messed up. It's not their job. It's my job. Why would I do that? But I can potentially, and I have done this periodically, try to get more engagement by phrasing things differently in a way that people will want to engage with. Okay. And by saying what I believe to be true, which is like, hey, I think this is the best build all around for this purpose. Tell me if I'm wrong. That, people will give feedback more that way. And that's what you have to do. Again, just whatever it is, you have to understand that people are still going to be people and you're not going to change the way that they think in any meaningful way in any short period of time. Lyrio says, wow, telling the sad metal dragon that his feelings don't matter is toxic. I'm sorry, Lyrio. And then Robert said, if I don't feel like I have a higher level of game knowledge than the person creating builds, I try not to give too much feedback. I may ask leading questions though. Yeah, I mean that's fair, Robert. I mean, it just depends on the situation and what have you. And again, my point is like, no one needs to give me any feedback. It's my job. That's what I'm supposed to be doing, right? So like, please don't take it. Like the last thing I would want anybody to feel like is they need to help me do my job, right? Like that doesn't make any sense. That's what I'm supposed to be the expert on it.
Help, but it doesn't hurt. It hurts. It jams up communication channels. Now, devs also want to provide games with features that are most wanted, because if you say, I like hot air balloon travel, and you're the only one among millions of potential game players, you're probably not going to get that. Maybe from a solo dev, but you're not going to get a big one. So that brings me to the question of this channel, of this particular.
So that's a really good point here, and I think it actually has more implications. It's outside of his point, but game companies in general, especially larger ones, they don't, and it's not just they need to make games that have the broadest audience appeal, and so that brings with it some difficulties and what have you. There are a lot of games that will try, and I'll talk about it and then I'll tell you what game I'm thinking of here in a second, because see if you guys can figure it out. I bet you can, given enough time at least. There are games that will try, and this has happened many times, that will say, hey, you know what? This isn't a game for everybody, right? But that's like not really saying anything. If you just say that, like, what does that even mean? It's like you're trying to like temper expectations kind of arbitrarily, right? But they'll say, hey, we're trying to make this type of game, okay? And what they're trying to say is like, don't expect us to be a different type of game than what we're trying to make, right? If you're looking at Path of Exile 2, not the game I'm thinking about here, but it works well. They're trying to make an action RPG, which is weird because action RPG, those words mean something, and what the game kind of is like totally different. It has nothing to do with the words that are used to describe it anymore. But a Diablo style of game or a Path of Exile style of game, there are certain things that people expect. There's certain things that come along with that, and you can riff on that and do whatever. But there's expectations that people have. Larger game companies are trying to make, again, the widest appeal, and so that's what they're going to do. And so their game decisions are not what would make the most fun and engaging thing. What would make this game, again, just the most fun? That's not the question. The question is, what will get the most number of people to buy this product? Now, if you are someone who wants really fun games and you want games that are just incredibly fun, whatever genre it is, that's why we absolutely need independent developers and independent studios. Someone like Larian who can say, hey, we're going to make this game the way we want to make it. And hey, if you don't like, there's going to be sex in this game. There's going to be like adult themes in this game. If you don't like it, that's fine. This isn't the game for you. but that's what we're going to do. And whatever it happens to be, right? There are plenty of examples of this. And I think as gamers as a whole, even if that's not my thing, I don't need sex in my RPG, okay? It's just weird to me. I don't need it. Whatever. If that's your kink, I don't care. Great for you. I hope you get what you want, right? But that's what we need. We need independent developers who are going to try to make a game that they find incredibly interesting and like they really want to make. The problem that happens a lot of times is that one, there's marketing, because you're essentially saying like, hey, I want a smaller this game is going to have a smaller audience. I feel like Ashes of Creation this has happened with, where I think that they have tried, and I think honestly it's probably been a fairly honest attempt to temper expectations and try to say like, hey, we want to make a certain kind of game. I just think that, at least for me, what kind of game that was still never clearly communicated. And I feel like so often that maybe they're so for me they reference other games, but they were games that I hadn't played very much. And for me, a touch point for that would have been like if they would have said, "Oh, this game is going to be like Eve, but instead of space, it's fantasy themed." That would have made more sense to me because that's a game I'm more familiar with, what have you. But it's still, whatever happened, they didn't communicate clearly what kind of game they were trying to make, and I think that that is a huge problem for a lot of indie game companies and what have you, and it causes a lot of issues. And the reason for that again is I think because the marketing side of it is like you don't want to limit your audience any more than you absolutely have to. So you're only going to say good things and talk about all the great things in your game. You're not going to tell people like, hey, listen, there's going to be griefing. It's going to happen. If you're not interested in a game that has griefing, then Ashes of Creation is probably not for you. Sure, they're going to say no. Instead, they're going to say like, no, we're going to try to minimize it, or oh, we have all these systems in place and what have you. At the end of the day, the way the game is going to be made, people can be griefed. You could be griefed, and if you don't want to have an experience where you're out picking flowers or petting, deer, and someone comes along and just murders you and takes your stuff, then that's not, that's not going to be the game for you. And they don't want to say that, I don't think, because it sounds negative and it's not good marketing. And so this is a new problem that I think a lot of indie games are having to work out. But the thing is that we really need indie games. And it's why I've tried to cover more of them here on the channel, because they are the future of gaming. The future of gaming is somebody, and the reason for that is because there is a person in charge of these studios who has specific thoughts, feelings, and they are also the person responsible. Their reputation is on the line. Larian is a person. He's the guy who owns Larian Studios, right? The same thing with Arrowhead. There's a couple of people that are in charge of the company, and it matters. The same thing with GGG, right? The makers of Path of Exile 1 and 2, right? There's a couple of people in charge, and one of them is public facing. That'd be Jonathan. And they're the people that, they're trying to make a particular game. They know what that game is like. There's a particular style and everything they're going for. And again, they're just trying to make the most fun game they can, not the game with the widest appeal. And there are companies such as Nine Dots that I think absolutely have all of this, and they don't make games that I think I like. I still want to promote them because I think that that is the future of gaming. And because I don't like something doesn't mean that you guys won't like something. Juan Carlos says, as you said, current focus for big companies, gaming or not, is how to make the product. I assume they don't see it as a game. Don't refer to it as that either. Oh yeah, that's a good point. More profitable. While smaller companies focus on enjoyment, functionality to gather more customers. Yeah, large businesses are known to be profit maximizing. Smaller business, medium-sized businesses are known to be, they can be, but they can also be more quality of life maximizing. And if you're a gamer and you've been a gamer your whole life and you made a game company, the thing that will improve your life the most is making a great game, because you can be proud of this thing that you've made, that you've worked your whole life to make. Absolutely.
Video. Do gamers even know what it is they like? And I say this because people will say they want certain features, almost that they demand certain features and that they hate other ones. But then the sales figures do not bear that out. They buy games that don't have the features they claim they demand, and they buy games with features they claim they hate. And I get that because games are an amalgam.
This is true, but I don't know if he's going to make the point that I think this makes. This is absolutely true. People say that they hate monetization in games and certain monetization strategies, and yet they buy and pay for games with those monetization strategies. I will tell you that I am not that person. And no shade on you if you are that person, right? Like you can, it's an imperfect world. You can hate part of it, but just like, well, it's the best thing and it scratches this itch, so I'm going to grab it. I think that controversial here. I don't like professional American football because I think it causes brain damage. I also don't like combat sports because it causes the effect it has on the people involved. Now, um, I'm not trying to shame anybody else who does like those things or whatever, and I've heard all kinds of reasons why people still like those things. That's fine. But I have a friend who's invited me to a game, and that was like a thing. It was like, oh, we don't hang out that much. Would you like to go to a game? And I don't go to professional games. I don't watch them on TV and what have you because I don't want to support that. I'm no shade on anybody who does anything different. That's just where I stand. So I also ESO. I mentioned this before, but ESO is grandfathered in because I've been playing it for a long time. But I will not play any other game in the future that has predatory monetizations like I feel like ESO does, or many other games that are even worse. But I'm just not interested, and I just won't play them in the future. And if that means this channel slowly dies, which I don't think it will, but I'm fine with that. Like I would rather that than support things that I think will have a negative impact on real people that have gambling issues, on children that get hooked on gambling. And there's been videos about this recently, guys, where there are literally children that are like hooked on gambling from gaming and stuff like this, and it's not a small problem. So, you know, that's fair. His point here is well taken, at least in that regard.
Of different features. It may have had some things you want and some things you don't, which is why it could really help when you leave feedback on that game. You say, I bought it because of these features, but I wished you had these instead. But the reason sales may not bear out what it is you said you wanted is, one, you may be a minority opinion. You may really want a certain feature, but most people don't, or they don't care about it. And you can say, everybody wants this, but not a lot of people do. I have a whole video on voiceover.
Um, if you're an in-game ESO player, this is you. By the way, you are the minority opinion. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. It could be less that way by, multitudes. Like there could be, many times the number of players in-game in ESO as there are. But I often think about this and realize this, that I am the minority of players. And if you don't know that, all you got to do is go pug a dungeon, right? And if you're on a DPS or on anything and look what the average DPS of the other players in the content is, and you're like, yeah, everybody parses at least 60 or 70K now, right? At least. And then you go into content and you're like, or 80 or 90K, whatever it is, depending on your level of sweat, what you think is reasonable. And then you go into like, a dungeon and someone's just light attacking the entire time, or they're using one ability, or they're using a couple of abilities, but they don't even realize that 3 of the 4 abilities they're using literally doesn't even do damage. These are all based on real stories, by the way. Um, I was in a V mall once. We are going to do hard mode, and it was a pug. This is a while back. Not the recent one went great on Friday, but there was somebody who they were on a warden, and they kept spamming their wings, which gives you speed and doesn't do anything for damage. They kept spamming it on the first boss in VMall, and they were running around cursing everybody, like DPS shuffling, while giving themselves increased speed. And other people thought that this person was a troll, and it turned out that they were just like an older gentleman who was ESL, and he was just doing the best he could. And he even asked me not to kick him from the group or remove him. I didn't really kick him out. Well, kind of did, but he had to go. But even asked me not to kick him, and I was like, dude, I'm sorry, but you don't even understand the basic abilities that you're using. We can't carry you through hard mode VMall. It's just not going to happen. And, that's the average. Maybe that's an extreme case, but those are the average players. So, realize that if you're an in-game ESO, you are the minority. And I try to respect that. The thing is that there's also this part where we're the minority, but professional players are the minority of sports players, right? However, like there being a professional tier or even an advanced tier, we're not professional, right? But even there being an advanced tier does draw people, and they're like, "Oh man, look what those guys can do. That's awesome." What they did a 25-minute, Sunspire. Wow, that's crazy. That's the kind of thing where it still draws people in and it makes people interested in what we do, even if they know that they're not even interested in actually doing it themselves, but they're like, man, it'd be cool just to be able to do that. I don't need to do it in 25 minutes, but it'd just be cool to be able to run through it, man. That's really hard. That's cool. And they watch and what have you. So, there are room for all different kinds there. And I think there is something about in-game. A lot of people too play MMOs and they in-game is what they're thinking about, even if they never get there as well. So there's other factors as well.
Over about that. And there were people who go, I don't care about voiceover. There are people who say I only buy games with voiceover. And there are people who said, yeah, I sometimes don't buy a game because if everything's voiced, I know it's a little rigid. But the flip side of why sales figures may not bear out your opinion is you may not guide your spending based on your beliefs. And this can be knowingly or unknowingly.
So a big part of that, though, I just want to say is like if a game is really good, it just has to be fun. That's it. Baldur's Gate, right? Helldivers too, right? Like there's plenty of games where like, wow, this just blew everybody away. If the game is good enough, the details become less important.
You may buy a game not knowing you didn't check the reviews and you didn't realize it did this thing you don't like. That would be unknowingly. The knowingly part is when you say you don't want something, but you buy games that have it anyway because they're popular, because your friends are playing it, because it had a couple extra things you did like. Well, guess what? The devs can't figure out what's going on because people said they didn't want this, but the game sold well. One issue is that
This is again the part when I mentioned like having someone who knows the game really well. The other part of it is having people that have different default interests. Okay. And for example, I and my wife have two different interests in games, right? Okay. We're married. We love each other. We've been together for a long time. We still have very different interests in games. And so that's what you need to have. You need to have people that have different interests in games. My issue with Civ is like, it seems like their lead QA person seems to just be all about combat, and it feels like that's reflected in the game. And it's like, are there other people there that are like less into combat and like could give you a different perspective on all this? And I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they have more QA people, but I don't know if they're listening to them. And that's what you need too. You need people with different perspectives, and they can tell you very well like what the game does well, what it doesn't do well. And when you get down to it, the core audience, like you can find that it's very solvable. I mean, most of the issues with ESO I could list out and a bunch of people would just agree with me. And maybe there's like a disagreement with a specific way of implementing something, or somebody doesn't like whatever, but we can all agree on the problems and roughly on a solution. And then, yeah, again, it's the hard part. You don't go to a restaurant expecting the chef being like, okay, exactly what seasoning should I put in this? And you're like, I don't know, dude, I just want it to taste good.
that none of those groups, people who are minority opinion or people whose spending doesn't align with their beliefs, whether knowingly or not, none of those groups are ever going to be well served by big business, by AAA games. And it's because they literally have to go after majority opinion to try to sell better. Occasionally there's a breakthrough where a game that no one expected or ever asked for busts through and everybody.
When there's a breakthrough, again, it's because somebody had the vision to go, I'm going to make a really fun game. I know how to do that, and I made it. And these companies act like, this happens the same way with within movies. There are companies that like, well, if we make a 25th Marvel movie, some amount of people will come watch it. So let's just do that. Or if we remake a movie we've already made, we know for sure that a set amount of group of people will come watch it, and we'll make probably the floor is fairly high, and so we probably won't lose money. They don't know, and they can't understand the creative aspect of it, and also the expertise required to both have the creativity to have an idea for a movie, and then the technical expertise to fulfill that, to actually follow through on it. the money people don't know what makes a good game. The thing is, it's really weird to hear from somebody who is the creative person that you know that this is an issue, or maybe he's just representing somebody else's point of view, I guess, here. But it really is that simple. And the thing is that there are people that are very creative and what have you, and they do know. They do know what will do good. And yes, it's a risk because it is hard to make something that is truly unique and creative and fun and what have you. But again, that's the job. And there are people that can do that, but a lot of times no one wants to take a risk on them. And it's funny because you can actually look at some people who are in those kind of industries. I think Jack Black, for example, where they'll mention where like, hey, some people ask him like, well, what advice would you give to somebody in reference to music? And he's like, well, you just got to go make it, and you'll make bad music at first, but then you'll get better. And like, but you shouldn't try to wait. You have to produce it and like distribute it yourself. You can't wait for somebody to pick it up because they're almost like you're just hoping for random chance to like kind of work out for you, which is why things like YouTube here are so cool, where you can I can try to make a channel that has a wide appeal that a lot of people really enjoy, and you know what, maybe I'll fail or whatever, but it's not like my fate is in somebody else's hands trying to get some company to pick me up for an idea for a show or something like that. If I wanted to do something, I could do it here.
He loves it. That's rare. And I've talked about with big budgets come less risk. If you have a minority opinion or you're somebody who doesn't spend like you talk, take a look at indie games. There's a ton of them. I'm sure there's one for you. In fact, there are so many games out there, more games than you could ever play. There's more games out there that align exactly with how you want to play games than you could ever possibly purchase or play. And they already exist. So that leads me to the question.
So I just want to say, absolutely, there are a ton of amazing indie games. A lot I've played recently that, I don't love all of them. There's some that I'm like, wow, this is really cool. This is really fun. Absolutely. And, I want to support them so that they can make bigger games, right? For bigger audiences. Larian, everybody's like, a lot of people just heard of Larian Studios. Larian has been making games for decades, right? And they've been around for a long time. Arrowhead, right, with Helldivers 2. Well, they made a Helldivers 1 first, and they made other games before that, even though that wasn't their own company. And I absolutely want to support people who do that because I think they'll just make better and better games. And it's weird because I think a lot of people just aren't interested in that. There's time investment. Learning a new game is hard. I understand. There's also the money aspect. Not everybody has the disposable income to just go out and buy games. I know I don't. A lot of times I'm like, hey, I'll play this on stream. Maybe somebody will buy it because I played it and talked about it. Sure. There's that aspect of it as well. His point about like there's a perfect game for everybody, I don't actually think that's true. Yeah. A lot of indie games are small in scope and don't necessarily do so. I don't necessarily I think he's pretty wrong in the last fact, but I think the first part and the main takeaway I hope is that, yeah, we should absolutely, if we want there to be the perfect game for us, we do need to support those creators who are trying to make really cool games and trying to build up to the game that they ultimately want to make.
Of why is everybody going online to complain? Because there are a ton of games that you would love. And the only conclusion I have is that you just like doing it. You just like complaining. And if that's you, that's fine. I get
that's a I want to say something stronger. That's a very rude thing to say. And I don't think that there are very many, maybe there are some people, but I don't think the majority of people are going online to complain just because they like to complain. I think that this mentality, though, is absolutely common among certain companies and certain groups of developers. But they really do think that people are going on to complain. And then Mel's here comment that just popped up is us gamers and our knee-jerk reactions. She's referencing something by the creative director of Elder Scrolls Online, who said on Twitter like that, like, basically made a comment, essentially like this, right? That people just complain and whatever. This is very much in line with a lot of the information we have about Elder Scrolls as far as how their thinking is. And certainly it goes along with how they've acted, right? Their actions that we can clearly judge in the public, where yeah, saying that people just like to complain, it's really weird. I just want to say that I like, I've enjoyed or found them informative. Some of Tim's other videos here, and this one feels like a little bit of a maybe not a left turn. It feels like he's finally saying the quiet part out loud, but I still enjoyed some of his other videos and found them informative and maybe you don't want to judge anybody by the worst work they've ever done. I hope nobody does that with me, and maybe this is the case with Tim. And in fact, he did another video apparently more recently where he kind of takes the other side. So I'll take a look at it offline and maybe see if it's something we could offer a different view of Tim. But don't think that just because one yeah, don't think that don't judge Tim completely just based on this one video. But yeah, that was a horrible take. And it's unfortunate that if he feels this way, almost certainly other developers do, where people just like to complain. Hey, Nani, how's it going? Juan Carlos says indie games tend to bring innovation to the gaming industry. 100%. And they bring it to the game industry because they show that you can do something else that makes money. And then all the money people are like, oh, how'd they do that? Okay, copy that. Instead of like, oh, how they did that was they made a fun game. That's all you got to do. Very easy to say, very hard to do. But this idea that gamers just want to complain and go online on forums and complain is it's a very it's sad. It's sad to hear, honestly, and it's unfortunate that this is probably echoed by a lot of game developers. And again, I think a lot of it comes from a place of like not being able to hear feedback and not being able to like not take it personally, and that's unfortunate. I think a lot of not everybody is should be. I very highly value privacy, and if I were not doing the thing that I'm doing now on YouTube, where I show my face to whoever who will watch, I think over 1 million views at this point, I would not choose to be a public figure or whatever in my everyday life. I prefer my privacy. I think most people do and should have a right to privacy, and game developers, if they don't want to be public, I think that's an option for them, and I think many of them take it. I just think some of them crack that seal and they don't understand that they're opening Pandora's box, and they don't understand that if you are going to be in charge of a gaming company at this point, that you are going to have to be a public figure and kind of deal with some of that.
Get it. Just bear in mind, it's not helping you get better games that you want. It would be far.
Yeah, it's not helping you get better games than you want. This is again blaming the customer. I just want to say one more time, kind of irks me, so I have to say something.
Better if you said exactly what it is you want.
Games would be better if only you guys, if only us, if only we would do a better job of giving feedback
instead of just saying what it is you don't want.
Yeah, okay.
And
hey, we want games without predatory monetization. Well, wait, you already knew that, but most game companies put it in there anyways because they're all about money. Oh, okay. So really, it's not actually about what we want. It's about what we want that also aligns with the, yeah. Anyways, it's silly.
You have to sit and have that conversation with yourself. Do you even know what it is you want? Do you know what you like?
I think he's feeling like this is a mic drop moment, and it's from a player's perspective, it is, but probably not in the way that he feels like it is. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, I don't, we said a lot during that. I don't think there's much else that needs to be said. Juan Carlos said you can only blame the customer if you sell things for left-handed people and a right-handed buys it and complains about it being awkward to use. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's you can't blame your customers for things. It's it's a losing strategy, and Tim is retired now, so he can say this stuff out loud. But I think it's very clear that a lot of game companies and a lot of developers feel this way, which is unfortunate. But here's the thing: there's a lot of up and coming developers who don't feel this way and who do understand the player perspective, who do understand that they are in a public facing field, that they are, going to get negative feedback from customers and stuff like that, and they're fine with it, and they know that that's what it's like. And part of the reason that they know and understand is because they've grown up with that. They've grown up with the same frustrations that you and I have, and yes, they want to be a developer because they want to improve, they want to do a better job of all of this stuff. And so that's that's the perspective they're taking, and they're fine with it. And they also grew up on the internet with their life on the internet, and so they know how that works, and they know how, you know, a little bit of what Tim has said here is kind of the case of, you know, you just got to understand that there's trolls on the internet. They're just going to be there, and you can't let that stuff bother you. But what you also don't want to do is then say everybody on the internet's a troll. And anybody who says anything I don't like is a troll and not helpful and whatever. It's a hard job. You got to parse through it. But I think that anybody, again, the game developers found themselves in a customer service industry when that's not originally what they signed up for. And I think some have evolved, some have grown and understand that. And some, I mean, Arrowhead, those guys aren't spring chickens, right? You know, there are plenty of other game studios, and I'm talking about games that I play, guys. There's more examples of these points, you know, but they realize that things are, you know, the game has changed, right? The meta of game development has changed, and you have to change with it, just like any job over time, unless you just get lucky and you're still doing the same thing you were 20, 30, 40 years ago. But in general, these things change, and you know, get out of the way if you can't lend a hand. The times they are a changing. Anyways, with those Bob Dylan lyrics, we're going to sign off for right now, guys. Appreciate everybody dropping in and chatting. We will be live tomorrow. We made 1,000 subscribers on the Homebrew Tabletop channel. I'm so excited about it. So we're monetized. I'm going to do some live streams with that, but then we'll jump over. Guys, if you want to support the channel, if you like what I do, consider becoming a channel member here on YouTube. You can start it for a dollar a month. If you want to support what I do, it's the best way to do it here on YouTube. There's also Patreon. There's also, you know, you can Twitch. We're working on getting monetized on Twitch. We'll be there soon, hopefully. But you know, if you like what I do and you want to support it, that's the best way to do it. Or, you know, share my videos, and I'm working on new build videos for ESO, and we'll be moving into Path of Exile and then Dune Awakening whenever it comes out. I know those three at least, and we'll see about Civ 7. I want to like it. I want to do more content, but anyways, appreciate all of you guys watching, and you know, Juan, Nani, Mel, Lyriel, Robert, and Daedric, I appreciate all of you guys dropping comments and chatting with me, hanging out here. So we'll see you guys soon. We'll catch you tomorrow, and hope everybody has a good evening.